Well, welcome to those of you at our New London campus, at our Bedford campus, and those joining us online. We are excited that you are here with us. My name is Jeremy. I'm the executive pastor here at Blue Ridge. I'm sure this has happened to you. I wonder if you've ever found yourself in a moment where you were so excited by what you were experiencing, what you were seeing, what you were watching, what you were doing, that you ended up responding in a way that you would later regret. I wonder if you've ever been in a moment where you've been so excited by the circumstances of what was going on, you ended up wishing you hadn't responded the way that you ended up responding. My family and I, we had one of those experiences this last summer. As many of you know, I've shared this before. We went on a month-long family camping trip out west this last summer. And we visited states like New Mexico and Arizona, Utah, Idaho, California, Wyoming. Just went all over. And we camped every night but one night. And on this trip, regularly, we were talking about, okay, because it's got brought up multiple times, like, what do we do? And not if, but when, because we figured it would happen when we encountered a bear. And not just black bear, because black bear are here and there, but also grizzly bear. Like, how are we supposed to respond? See, each one of the ladies in my home had expressed their fear almost on panic attack type level, and understandably, an encounter with a living bear. And so, my fear wasn't necessarily with the bear itself in the encounter, but how the girls might respond in the situation, like screaming and running, which is like the last thing you want to do, because that just says to a bear, hey, I'm food, come chase me. And so we talked regularly about like, how are we supposed to respond? And so we said, okay, hey, if we come in contact with a bear, the first thing is we remain calm. We announce ourselves like, hey, bear, we're here. We raise our hands up, get our arms up in the air so we look bigger than what we actually are, and then we calmly back away slowly. That's what they teach you. And so we just repeat that. Stay calm, announce yourself, raise your arms, and back away slowly. So we were in the Tetons, and we were on this hike around this lake called Jenny Lake, and we're about an hour into this hike, and it's a beautiful place, but it's a place that almost daily, there are people that come in contact with bears. And so we were about an hour into this hike, and a woman coming the opposite direction at us stopped us and said, hey, I just want to let you guys know that there's a bear off the trail to your left about 100 yards in front of you. And so my mistake is I probably should have just had the kids and my wife, and we should all just stayed there for a bit and given the bear plenty of time to clear out. But we thanked her for the warning, and we kept on hiking, keeping our eyes out for this bear. She said it was off the trail. So we made our way about 100 yards up, and I was looking to my left and water to the right, and looking up, and I heard there was bushes there about 5 or 6 feet tall off the trail to our left, and I heard branches cracking, but it was hard to tell where it was coming from because of the water. The sound was bouncing off the water over here. So I was looking up, but I couldn't see it, but I just said back to everyone, said, hey, there's a bear to our left. I can hear it up there moving through the brush, the overgrowth up there, these bushes. And so we continued moving forward, and we're looking to our left at the hill when all of a sudden Jana very excitedly says to me, there it is. And so we stop, and I'm looking maybe 50 feet up the mountain, maybe 75 feet up the mountain, the hillside there, and I can't find it. And so Jana, looking at where I'm looking, goes, no, not right there. And she points to about 5 or 6 feet off the trail to our left, says, right there. And I look, and sure enough, now I couldn't tell exactly how big this bear was because, again, the bushes were about 5 or 6 feet tall, and all I could see the haunches of this bear there in the bush. So immediately, I start to back away slowly. Well, to my shock and surprise, the girls don't run and scream. They want to get a better look at the bear. Like legitimately, they can't see, they're like, we can't see the bear. So my wife starts picking them up and over the bushes so that they can get this better look at this bear that's right there. One by one, she does it. And then she pulls out her phone because she wants to get a video, and I don't know, a selfie with the bear. she's taking a video and a picture, but she can't get a great picture of it because it's buried in these bushes, but it's literally right there. And so I'm literally trying to get their attention, like, okay, trying to get Jana's attention, calmly say, hey, we need to back away from this bear, but my family's too busy thinking we're at some sort of like wild family petting zoo or something like that. And so finally I say, okay, guys, let's start backing away. And honestly, Jana kind of frustratedly looks at me. It's like, what? You know, I haven't even gotten a good picture or video of this bear yet. But she puts away her phone and we continue down the trail. Well, later on that evening, we're at camp. The girls are in bed. Jana and I are sitting around the campfire. And I say, hey, Jan, let's debrief today a little. And I said, you know, and I literally said this, almost verbatim. I said, you know, like when we go to the zoo and they have all those animals and then they have the thick glass or the concrete barriers or the metal between us and them, there's a reason for that. And I say, Jan, all that was between you and the girls was just some twigs, some bushes. And if that bear had decided it no longer was interested in whatever it was doing and it was more interested in you guys, it would have been on you in a moment. And there would have been nothing we could have done about it. And she sat there and she was quiet and she thought about it. And then literally her eyes started to well up with tears. And she goes, Jeremy, I'm literally sick to my stomach. I can't believe I did that. You see what she's saying in her excitement of coming in contact with the bear, in her excitement, her brain kind of just short-circuited in that moment. And now looking back, she's like, I can't believe I responded in that way. Now, to be fair, we've all done things like this. Maybe not with a bear, but we've all done things like this when we've been excited by a moment. I remember when we first moved out here 22 years ago. I'd never been to DC, went to DC, and when we parked, I got out, I locked the door. The keys were not only still in the car, but they were still in the ignition and the car was still running. So we've all done things like this. I'm sure some of you drove here in a car that you regret the car payment and the insurance you have to carry. Like your intention was just to show up to the car dealership and just kind of look around, and you test drove the car that you knew was too expensive, but it was really just more for fun. And then you got in there and you got excited by the smell of that new leather and the stitching and the multi-tone and all the different options, and your brain short-circuited, right? And you didn't think about the implications of month in and month out, the payments that would come that you're now tied to. See, all of us at one level or another, at some point in our life, have been excited by something that we've seen, something we're doing, something we've been involved in the moment, where we end up responding in a way that later on we regret. Well, today, as we're continuing in this series in Luke 10, this is exactly what we're gonna see happen with the 72 disciples that Jesus has sent out. We're gonna see these group of guys excited and respond in a way to their excitement that Jesus says, hey guys, hold on. Let me warn you, if you keep on going down this path, I think you might end up regretting it. So if you got a Bible, you can open up to Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10, but while you're turning there, let me talk to you about this a little bit before we jump in. Let me say this, as we have walked through this series, obviously we're looking at this whole idea of what does it look like to take these dreams and visions that we're asking for God to give us as a church so we can become more and more a church that's going out and making disciples, or in turn, making more disciples, and that we believe each one of us has, God is going to tap on the shoulder in different ways and say, hey, this is the dream or vision I have for you. Well, but where do we start? And we just feel like Luke chapter 10 is a practical place to start living this out. And so we've been looking at these principles that Jesus is teaching these 72 that he's sending out and figuring out what applies to us specifically. What principles do we see here? Well, we know as we're doing this, there are a lot of us in different places when it comes to this whole idea of going out and making disciples, or in turn, make more disciples. And that is that some of us, we're bought in. We believe in this, we're doing this, and we love this. Others of us, we're listening, but we're not yet convinced. And then there's a whole nother group of us. Maybe one of the reasons might be because maybe you're not a follower of Jesus yet, but this just isn't for you. This is just not where you're at. Well, Today is specifically difficult as we continue in Luke 10 because really it applies, it's something hard to apply directly to where we are right now. But really, this was, I believe, put there so that we could see kind of what things we might encounter if we really started living as a group of people or as individuals in a way where we're going out and making disciples who are in turn making more disciples. Another way to look at this is like, I don't know if you've flown commercially, but you get on a plane and the pilot every now and again will come over the intercom before the flight takes off and maybe she'll say something like, hey, today, welcome aboard. We're glad you chose to choose to fly with us. Today, we're going to be flying about 36,000 feet, and we're going to be flying at about 460 miles per hour. We should have you to your destination about 4.5 hours. Oh, and by the way, we've been made aware that about an hour into the flight, there's going to be some air turbulence. And what is the pilot doing? What is she doing in that moment? Even though you haven't taken off, even though you're still on the runway, even though you're still maybe at the terminal, she's preparing you for what you're going to experience as you move into flight. Well, that's similar to what Jesus is doing here for us, I believe. That maybe a lot of us haven't even taken off yet. But he's saying, hey, I want you to be aware of turbulence that will most likely show up if and when you take flight. So, Luke chapter 10, and we start reading in verse 17. It says this, the 72 returned with joy and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. Now, real quick, let me set the scene before we're gonna come back and reread that in a moment, but let me set the scene. So in the first 16 verses, Jesus has been preparing these 72 to go out. He's been teaching them all that they needed to know, like the whole idea of pray to the Lord of the harvest. He's given their identity of the sent. He's talked to them about the man or the person of peace, talked to them about go eat, heal, and speak about my kingdom, talked about when they're gonna experience rejection. I mean, just walk them through a whole process up to before he sends them out. But between verses 16 and 17, they've actually gone out and they have now returned. That some time has passed. We don't know how long. Was this a weekend? Was this a month? We just don't know. We just know that they've gone out and now they've returned back to him. And they're excited because, why? Because what Jesus taught them to do before they sent out, they actually went out, they were obedient to it, they did it, and it's actually working. And so read with me again, verse 17, it says, the 72 returned with joy and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. Now, imagine with me the 72, they've gone out and they've been obedient to what Jesus told them to do. They've put into practice this process that he's given them along the way, and they've carried the stress and the weight however long they've been out there, the weight of rejection that I'm sure happened, the weight of what it is he was asking them to do. But this amazing thing happens is that while I'm sure they experienced some rejection, some people who weren't interested, what they're very much aware of and what they're excited about is the fact that this is actually working. Like they're going out there, they're praying, and people are actually being healed. People, rather than rejecting them, are responding to this invitation to become a part of God's upside down kingdom. And they're excited about this. You see, most of them have only ever just watched Jesus do these things. This is the first time for many of these 72 that they're actually being able to be used by God to do these miraculous things and watch these lives change. And they are jazzed, they are excited, they are overjoyed, they're rejoicing. And we get it, right? We get it. I think most of us here, if we engage in this way, if we're obedient in this way and we watch God show up in this way, we'd be excited too. But look at what Jesus uses this for. He uses this for a teaching moment. Verse 18, he says, he replied, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Now Jesus gets heavy real quick, like these guys just come back inside. Yeah, guys, I get that, but I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. It's like, what is Jesus saying here? Well, we don't know from the text whether Jesus is referencing the events that have already taken place that we read about in the Jewish scriptures, what we call the Old Testament, through prophets like Isaiah and Ezekiel that talked about Satan's original fall from heaven, from grace, from the kingdom of God, or if he's had a vision of the future, a vision like what John would later record for us in the book of Revelation about Satan's final fall, or something else. We don't know exactly what Jesus is referencing here, but what he is clearly talking about and what he clearly wants these 72 to know is that Satan's authority and power over people have been broken by him. And this gets clearer as we continue and read Jesus' words. It says, I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions. Now, he's not literally talking about actual snakes and scorpions here. He's talking, these are metaphors for the real physical danger and the real spiritual danger they would experience, that they had experienced already, and they would experience in the future as they declared the kingdom of God. It says, I've given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. Jesus is very clearly saying to these guys, hey, this is what I was telling you about when I sent you out. This is what I wanted you to understand. This is what I was telling you to pray to the Lord harvest, because what you need to know is that I've given you this authority. Like, this shouldn't surprise you that you're watching this work, that you're seeing the power of my Father and his Spirit work in and through you guys in these ways. It's what I was trying to prepare you for as I was sending you out. And he continues. He says this, though. I know you're excited about what you've been able to experience. However, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. See, Jesus understands that even in success, we can become too focused on the outcome. Sound familiar? Dave talked about the whole idea last week as Jesus was preparing the disciples to go out. Dave talked about this whole idea of how we often measure success. And it's based off of a good outcome. And Jesus was preparing the disciples to deal with rejection that would come. And what Dave really refocuses us on, what Jesus was teaching the disciples, is it's not about the outcome. That's up to the Lord of the harvest. He's the one in charge of the outcome. Yours is about the input, about the obedience. Yours isn't about the output. That's God the Father. He's gonna ultimately be the one responsible for how things work out. And now Jesus is just looking at this same issue from the flip side of the coin. What happens when we go out and are obedient to God and things actually work? Like seems to be the case for these 72. What happens when we go out and we're obedient and lives actually begin to transform and change? What happens when we have that dream or that vision, that calling, that prompting from God inside of ours and it may be back to be our kids, it may be to be our youth, it may be with something on this campus or on Bedford's campus or somewhere else, it may be with a church plant somewhere else, it may be with a home church, it may be with something with my neighborhood or in my work or with my family or with those people walking through a divorce or college students or high school students or whatever, my friends, whatever that prompting, that vision is that we receive and that we take that step of obedience, what happens when it actually starts to transform and change lives? What happens rather than experiencing rejection? People that we go to actually start experiencing revelation from God. And lives are transformed and lives are changed. See, Jesus is saying, hey, the same danger is there both when it's hard and when it's successful. That we can get zeroed in on, we can be focused on the outcome. And that can be the measure of success. He's saying this. He's saying to these 72, hey, I know you're excited. I know you've got a lot of joy right now in what you're experiencing, but your excitement and your joy cannot be primarily anchored on the what, but rather on the who or the whose you are. Your joy and your focus can't be primarily anchored on the what, but rather the who or the whose you are. What do I mean by that? Well, look again at verse 20. However, Jesus warns, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you. That's the what. That's the outcome. That's the result. That's the lives being changed and transformed. And he's saying, yeah, that's great, that's exciting, that's awesome, but don't let you can't be primarily anchored on the what. He says, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. He says, as good as the things that you're getting to experience may be, as much success as you're experiencing along the way on a human level or on a kingdom level, as many lives you're seeing transformed and changed, here's the deal. Don't let the what take primary focus, but rather the who or the whose you are. But rather the who, the whose you are. Now he continues in this in Luke 10:21. Look at this. Look at the contrast here. At that time, Jesus full of joy. So Jesus is excited too. As this is the same episode, the 72 of return, he's excited. He's overflowing with joy, which I love. He loves that they've been able to experience God's work through them. He loves that that they're seeing the power, that they can actually do the things that Jesus did because of the power of God working through them. And he's full of joy. He says, at that time, Jesus full of joy. Now look at the difference in the contrast of where his joy comes from and what it's focused on. At that time, Jesus, full of joy through the Holy Spirit, said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you were pleased to do. You see, Jesus is full of joy, but his joy is anchored to the who, the Father, the Lord of heaven, and what pleases him. That's where what he's primarily anchored to, not the what. See, Jesus is saying in 72, it's okay to be excited. It's okay to have joy in what you're being able to experience. Just make sure you're not primarily anchored on the what, on the results, on the outcome, on what you're getting able to experience, but rather the who or the whose you are. Now, I wonder why it is that of all the things that they could have talked about that day when the 72 returned, because I'm sure there were all sorts of stories that they were sharing. I'm sure they didn't just come back and talk about the demons even submitting to them. I'm sure they were sharing all sorts of other things, both the good things and the hard things that they experienced along the way. That's just, if you've ever been in an experience with a group of people, that's what you do when you're kind of debriefing all that's happening. But why is it that of all the things that they talked about, Jesus had Luke later on record this so that we would have this? Well, I think there's two primary dangers. There's others, but there's two primary dangers when our focus is on the what. And the first danger is ego. How quickly it can devolve to being just about me. Look what I've done. Look at what I am responsible for. When we are experiencing God move in and through us, as we respond to the dreams and the visions that he's given us, and we go out to make disciples and we watch lives change, ego very quickly can come at the center. I can look at what I'm responsible for. In fact, look back at what the disciples said here. It says, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. I wonder how long if Jesus had let them remain in this place. How long till they dropped the last three words and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us. You see, it's so easy when things are going well for the deceiver, the evil one, to say, okay, you guys have been obedient to the first step, but here's where I can now really get into the middle of this. I can make you believe that you're the one responsible for what is happening. See, the primary one comes back to ego, but then there's a secondary one, and I know this sounds churchy, but I couldn't think of a better way to say it. It says, it can become more about the blessing rather than the blesser. It can become more about the experience. It can become more about the good thing. It can become more about the lives being changed and transformed. All good things, but that can become the thing that we want to worship, the thing that we want more of rather than Jesus. It can become more about the blessing than the blesser. You know, I've, like said at the beginning of this talk, I've been at Blue Ridge for 22 years, almost 23 now. And when I first showed up, it was meeting at Lincoln Middle School in Lynchburg in their cafeteria. There was a few hundred people showing up, and it was great. And over the better part of the last 2 decades, I've just gotten a front row seat to seeing lives transformed and changed and celebrating that. And just so glad that I've gotten to be a part of it. And with that came natural things like, for example, growth, moving from a few hundred people to a few thousand people. And that's exciting. It's amazing to be gathered with large groups of people, worshiping God together, celebrating stories of life change through baptisms and other things like that. Seeing people serve and give their lives away, like that stuff's exciting. And then the pandemic hit. And you guys know, if you've been around here for any amount of time, I guarantee there are people that you were connected with that left here because they were not they didn't believe how we led through what we believe God was saying to us through scriptures as leaders. They left here angry with how we felt like God wanted us to navigate the pandemic. And then add into that, God also speaking to leadership and just saying, hey, I believe there's a new thing that I have for you guys as a church. And that's gonna require change, and change is never fun, especially in a season where everything is changing. I want you to be more focused in this next season of disciples making disciples, and what does that look like? I want you to empower people to have dreams and visions that don't just come from this stage, but that they personally own to go and live this out. And I can tell you, it's been difficult. It's been hard. And I can tell you, if our focus was more on the what, gathering large groups of people to be here on a Sunday morning to feed my ego, which is easy to justify with a noble kind of overlay, it'd be nearly impossible to be obedient to the things that Jesus is asking and inviting us to move towards. See, Jesus wanted the 72 to understand and wants us to understand, hey, you may still be sitting at the tarmac, but here's what you need to know. You need to know that when you're obedient, yeah, sometimes it's gonna be tough. In fact, a lot of times it's gonna be tough. But there are gonna be these other times where I begin to move and my spirit begins to transform and change people. And the downfall and the temptation will be to anchor onto the what, rather than the who or the whose you are. What does this look like? What does this look like practically? Well, to illustrate this, I wanna share with you a story of a young man. His name is Christian. He serves on the band at the Bedford location, and his nickname is, I just forgot his nickname, but you'll see it in the video now. Sorry, I know him by his first name, Christian. And I want you to listen to Christian's story about how he could have zeroed in on the what, but it was his encounter with the who that brought the joy and the peace and the experience with Christ that redefined everything. Take a listen to Christian's story.
So, this is my studio space in my home. It's where I recorded my last album and I did much of the work for it. So my title track to my album is called The Garden. It's me contemplating, like, man, like, God, if we went back to the garden, like, would all of these horrible things in my life have ever happened? Can we take it back to the garden with a second chance of trusting what you say? My father passed away of a heart disease called cardiomyopathy when I was 6 years old. He was 36. And that left me, my brother, and my mom in the house. And that really took its toll on all of us. Obviously, none more than my mother. That was heavy over the next couple of years. I have two siblings, older sister and an older brother. They're both way older than me. We claim to be Christians, but none of us really practice it. I probably remember going to church like once or twice when I was a kid. During this time, I learned how to play piano, and my mom was like my biggest fan. She was the reason I loved playing. She was the one that told me to practice. She was the one that told me to sit up straight when I didn't want to. And it was right in between Christmas and New Year's. It was during the holidays. I noticed my mom had become super ill in a short amount of time. It was over the span of a couple of days. And I, being a 10-year-old, like, I'm telling her, like, you need to go to the hospital. Like, you don't look good. Standing at the wall, desperately in need, soon to die of thirst and my iniquity. Then one morning, I woke up and went to her room to go check on her before school one day, and I noticed her on the ground. And she wasn't responsive. I freak out. I go to my brother's room, and all I had to tell him was like, hey, like, something's wrong, for him to come back, and we go both rushing to my mom's room. There is living water, I cannot. We, like, lose it. Like, that was the worst day of my life. We call a neighbor, they come over, we call 911, and that whole day was just a litany of people coming over, trying to console us. I saw my sister come into the house, and she freaks out, and it was terrible. And all I could feel for a second for that day was, like, what am I gonna do? My mom was the reason I loved playing piano. She was the reason that I wanted to do it, and I didn't have a disdain for it. I just was indifferent towards it. There wasn't really a reason for me to play anymore. The next day, I went to school. It had gotten around. People knew. And that was probably the hardest part, was becoming identified as the guy who lost both of his parents. It became an inseparable part of my identity. I was depressed. I didn't feel like I had much of a purpose. And I certainly didn't have a relationship with God that I would trust in him at that time. So this song is Can I Be Honest? I'm questioning, like, God, can I be honest with you? Can I be vulnerable? Can I express my full self? And I think that's a huge part of our process in our relationship with him. My mom passed away of a drug overdose. I was 10 years old. This yoke is hard, this burden breaks my back. My sister at the time was 26, and she moved into the house with us, but my sister became my legal guardian for the back half of my childhood. I had a couple of friends. I knew them previously as kind of like bullies, like they didn't really care about anyone. They ruined a lot of people's day. I noticed one day that there was a huge shift in behavior. Can I be honest about my shame? They went from being these mean bullies that I once knew to really kind people, genuine. One day, they got around to asking me, you know, Christian, would you like to receive Christ, your Lord and Savior? And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. And so they explained it to me, and I'm like, yeah, I would love that. I'm repeating these words after them, like, you know, I believe Jesus Christ is Lord and all these things. And as I'm repeating these words after them, I'm like weeping. I experienced an overwhelming sense of peace and joy that I could not have experienced from anything or anyone else. I was 12 when I gave my life to the Lord, and I had that conversation with my friends, and A couple years later, I got baptized, and that was me affirming my decision that I'm not gonna let the loss of my parents or whatever else I experienced beforehand define me. Only Christ defines me. He's my foundation now. Since then, my life has been an ongoing journey of mourning and grieving, and yet still recognizing that the Lord is faithful through that, and recognizing that he's a good God. Though my mom was once my motivation for playing, and I still want to honor her in that, the Lord has altogether given me new reason and new motivation for playing, and that's that I might glorify him and serve others through the music that I make and the music that I play and perform. Sometimes I think like, man, if the fall didn't happen, would X, Y, and Z have happened? You know, would I have lost my parents? So that's how the song started, right? Like, can we take it back to the garden? But it all ties back in together. The reality is I am going back to the garden because God is going to restore all things. And then I say, soon we will be back in the garden. Soon we will be back in the garden. There were times early on where I still screamed at God, and I was still angry at God earlier on in my faith. And then I started to realize, like, there's nothing in Scripture that says we go without suffering. And that's further affirmed in the fact that Jesus suffered himself more unjustly than anyone in this life. And so I have a hard time believing that just because terrible, unjust things have happened to me, that God's not good. And he's faithful to take the evil things that have happened to me inevitably and use them for good, for his purpose, that I might have joy nonetheless through them.
Go ahead. I mean, Christian had every reason to allow the what in life to become the excuse to take his focus off the who. And yet, he shared in there, it's because of whose I am, who I became as a result of whose I am, that the what took second seat. See, God knew that as he called these 72 out to go, and he knows as he invites us to go out and appoints us with dreams and visions of reaching new people in new ways, he knows sometimes it's gonna be hard, and sometimes it's gonna be amazing and exciting, but in both cases, he's saying you can't primarily be anchored on the what. Good or bad. That can't be what you're primarily anchored to, but rather the who or the whose you are. So how do we practice this, especially if we're in this place where the plane hasn't taken off yet? Like, we're not in the air. This is just a warning about other turbulence that can come when we start living this lifestyle. How do we start to prepare ourselves? Well, one of the ways in which we do this, because we need to have practices in place that are constantly bringing us back to the whose we are. And one of those practices is communion, that regularly center us back onto whose we are. So here's what I wanna do. We're not gonna take communion quite a second, but you were given paper as you came in. Would you grab both the paper, and if you wanna grab the communion cup so it's ready, we're gonna do a song here in a bit, and then we'll take communion after that song. But here's what I wanna do. Would you grab that piece of paper, and here's what we're gonna do. We're going to practice listening to whose we are. And so at the top of that card, here's what I would love for you to write. Who or whose I am. Now, obviously, this is for people who are followers of Jesus, because if you're not a follower of Jesus yet, then you're still not his. And if that's the case, that's okay. Follow along with what we're gonna do, listen to it, meditate on Christian's story, because I believe there's something in that for you. But if you are a follower of Jesus, write down back at the top, go and bring that slide back up, write down who or whose I am at the top. And here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go through 3 different passages, one from Isaiah, one from Colossians, and one from Revelation. And they're not gonna be up on the screen, but here's what I want you to do. I just want you to listen. And these passages, they describe who God is. And I just, as something sits here, I just want you to write down what words stick out to you. Because in the end, we're gonna use this kind of as a lens as we sing the next song. As we talk about and sing about Jesus' blood that made a way for us to become children of who we're describing on this piece of paper. I want that in front of us. So just take a listen as I read through these passages and write down anything that comes to mind of who he is. Isaiah 40, verses 28 and 29 says, have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God. That's who he is. The creator of the ends of the earth. He does not grow faint or weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. We move out of the Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament. We move to the New Testament, Colossians. Listen to what this describes about who Jesus is. Write down anything that sticks out. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or powers or rulers or authority, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things, not some things, not most things, but all things are held together. He, Jesus, is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn among the dead, what we're going to remember in communion here in a moment, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. That's who he is. We finish up with John's Revelation, chapter 22, verse 13. Jesus, triune God, they're speaking and they say, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. I am the Alpha, the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. This is whose you are. So with those papers in your hand, would you stand right now? We're gonna sing, and then we're gonna take communion. I'll lead you guys through it. We'll lead you guys through it together. But as you sing, I just want you to realize this song talks about the price that Jesus paid so that we could become the children of the God that is described in part on those papers. I want you just to take in whose you are. Not what you've done, but whose you are. Jesus, I pray that you would give us eyes to see and ears to hear who you are and whose I am. It's your name we pray. Amen.